All right, y'all. This is a special episode today and a special opportunity. And I know all of you and I am going to enjoy hearing what's going on with Mainvest, talking to founder and CEO Nick Matthews. And Nick, man, thank you so much for taking the time to join today. Just do a quick introduction of yourself, if you would.
For sure. Yeah. Nick Matthews, founded Mainvest back in 2018. We really didn't get it off to the races until late 2019. But founded Mainvest as a community platform to really connect communities and local businesses and enable direct investment into small businesses with those returns being provided back to the community as opposed to larger financial institutions, just to create stronger economic development ties within communities and grow our local domestic economies.
Well, the mission is awesome and I love it. What prompted it?
There's a short story and a long story, but my background prior, I was an early employee at Uber. So I launched Uber in the Boston market back in 2011, was with the firm for around 7 years, far enough away from it now to the point that I can call it the firm. But early into that, one of the things that I was experimenting with was can Uber work outside of major metropolitan areas? So, based in Boston, Massachusetts, we were expanding to Providence, Rhode Island, a lot of the New England regional areas. And it was also looking at the supply demand liquidity in suburban areas or smaller cap population towns like Worcester, Massachusetts, 200,000 people, and brought to a lot of just small local communities, a lot of mill cities as we call them in Massachusetts, that maybe had stagnated economic development when rubber or trail freight went to rubber freight and all the a bunch of cool different reasons. My poli sci background nerd kind of in looking at that, it really brought me down an economic development rabbit hole, which is really where I first got edified in the role that small businesses play in terms of those local communities, both acting as cornerstones and creating an immense amount of identity for the communities, but also in terms of economic job creation, the value that they provide. And in looking at the kind of capital flows, it just felt incredibly broken. Institutional capital was not properly set up to lend to small businesses. Post the 2008 financial crisis, where home equity became the most stable asset in the world, became volatile for the first time in 100 years. Right. Institutions, the risk profiles changed, and SMB lending dropped off a cliff. It dropped 69% across the US in a 2-year period and barely recovered in the next 10 years, less than 10%. And it was just it didn't make a lot of sense that these institutions were the ones basically deploying the capital. Led to this kind of marketplace question with the Uber hat on at that point in time of, well, why aren't the people that these businesses are serving able to be voting with their wallets, acting as a social underwriting mechanism? And can you actually take that capital or a portion of people's investable capital and have it deployed directly into their local businesses? Why isn't that a thing? Was kind of the question back then. And the answer came pretty quickly with securities regulations and the Securities Act of 1934, accredited investor limitations, public-private placements, and kind of shut it down. It was oh, well, that's the reason not. And then you fast forward to 2016, there was a regulatory change from the Jobs Act called regulation crowdfunding that basically created a regulatory framework to enable that. It wasn't even necessarily designed for it. It was designed more for letting retail investors invest in early stage tech companies. But the underlying mechanism unlocked the ability to build something on top of it to enable that community investment model. And that's really where the gears kind of started turning and what led to Mainvest. And I worked a bunch of small business jobs in college and high school, and middle school. Basically, as soon as I was able to have my parents sign the paper, I worked at this local community grocery store I grew up in a small town north of Boston, 5,000 person population, and Gill's Grocery, Jim Guilford, the owner, my boss from 14 to 18, looking back at that and the value that store provided in the community and the identity and just knowing every single person coming in, this guy's going to come in at 10 o'clock to buy his milk, that overlap of local business and how ingrained communities are there, and the alternative being having to eat out at Olive Garden 5 nights a week. It felt like a mission worth dedicating a life to.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, the it's interesting the delineation between small business and then restaurants and hospitality businesses. Do you focus mainly on hospitality businesses, or what is your mix?
It kind of naturally has emerged as the logical early adopter in terms of like
Yeah,
our
because
organic growth, right? When you think about like small businesses, yeah, like any kind of brick and mortar business to consumer business is like serviceable on Mainvest, and I think makes sense with the model. But yeah, we are predominantly food, bev, and hospitality, like breweries, bakeries, restaurants, some yoga studios and the like. But predominantly, I think it's like 80% is food, bev, and hospitality. And it does make a lot of sense in terms of kind of that idea around, like you can call them like I guess economic system, like third spaces. A brewery is a space that outside of the home, outside of the workplace, people can go and congregate and acts as a great form of community. Restaurants in a very similar way, like people are going there. Sometimes you're seated and isolated to your table of four. But they act as like such an important social mechanism for people to get together and actually be human. It's I think it's very integral into society as a whole, and that's where when you look at kind of like trends and challenges there, and the biggest challenge small businesses face is around capital access, continued capital access. Inflation is obviously a massive challenge right now. You know, there are plenty of challenges, but that being the one that we felt was you know within our reach to solve, tackle that big problem, and then through that kind of being able to create an ecosystem and bring all of these small businesses together. There are so many things that you can start to do in the long term once you take, if you call it like an asset class or like a portfolio of local owner operator small businesses across the US. You have like 600, 700 cafes. Suddenly that opens up opportunities for collective buying across different levels of the supply chain, and being able to unite them and build out different products and value features to allow small businesses to compete with the big guy at that level of scale.
Well, look, I mean, restaurants have always been a tough one for banks. Banks don't love restaurants. It's hard to raise money if you're opening a restaurant or a brewery or a distillery or whatever. Super capital intensive, fraught with risk, high failure rate, and so on. So, God, dude, I've got like 1,000 questions I want to ask you. I don't even know. Like, I mean, dude, I'm so fascinated with this topic. Because you just nailed something. Like, look, 16 years in, we have like close to 6,000 restaurant customers across the US, some in Canada. All of them are, I mean, our very largest customers might have 15 locations, like a large restaurant group with like 15 locations. Our average customer has like two. And their restaurants primarily, their coffee shops, their breweries, their distilleries, their boutique hotels, their ice cream shops, their locally owned businesses. We have been, right prior to COVID, we were spending a lot of energy trying to do what you're talking about, which is find ways that this community as a collective could leverage its weight to negotiate good opportunities for them to all benefit from. Meaning that, like, I was talking to Standard and Poor's about doing a special offer for a simple IRA for all of our customers. We actually had a cool deal that we did with Nike right prior to COVID, where they said, look, you've got 250,000 end users that work in these restaurants out there, and they're wearing their shoes out all the time. We're going to do a special offer for anybody. So just stuff like that, like for the end user, the employee, and then but mainly for the business. And we've been working a lot on that. I kind of through COVID and all that went on there, and then we had a ransomware attack a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago. So we've kind of like restabilized, and like I've been deploying a lot of energy into that. And I love the vision you have for that, because you're right. They can't on their own, you own a restaurant here in Charlotte, North Carolina, you've got no leverage, you've got no buying power, you've got no economies of scale and the things that the chains have in your big well-funded competitors have. And but you do if you're part of some larger organization. And the thing is, there's not been larger organizations that have really bound. There's like state associations and the National Restaurant Association.
Right.
They're primarily kind of focused on chains. So anyway, man, I love the vision you have, and I love the people that you're supporting. I mean, I've been doing this podcast for 16 years, primarily just to get to know a lot of our customers, and we've done over 500 episodes. And dude, I'll tell you straight up, when we started Schedule Fly, I thought, good business model. Let's go see if we can just sell a lot of subscriptions and make a profitable business. Since then, primarily from talking to customers and doing the podcast, I've completely fallen in love with the people we serve. They're amazing freaking people. Like, they have incredible. I just did up in Boston. I just did an episode with Tom Holland. He owns 2 restaurants up there, A&B Burgers and another. And
Oh yeah, there's an Avian Burger right down the street in Beverly. I love. I know. Yeah, that's amazing. That's such a local connection. Randomly,
you got to listen to his episode, man.
I definitely got it. That's awesome.
This is why I love this industry, because here's a guy, like, I thought, like, A and B stands for, the initials are the initials of his son's names. All right, A and B. So I'm like, oh, that's a cool story. Let's talk to Tom and see if he'll come on the podcast. And okay. Then he proceeds to tell me that at age 15 in Boston, he left home, didn't go to high school, hitchhiked to San Francisco, followed the dead, got involved in drugs and alcohol and substance abuse, was spiraling. And at age 30, he goes to a halfway house, cleans himself up, first time out, decides right then and there, I'm changing my life. I'm done. I'm clean. I'm sober. And here we are 22 and a half years later, or 23 and a half years later, married, 2 kids, successful restaurants. I mean, what a
one of the best burgers in Boston, for sure, man.
Yeah, dude. And like
their lamb burger, I had it like I was there like a week ago. That's so funny. You brought up, it's gonna sound staged now, but it's not. If people ever look at our offices, like, they can see it. That's so funny. Yeah, their lamb burger is fantastic. They call it a Greek burger or lamb burger, but it's both.
And that's, check out his episode, man. There's like story after story after story after story of people that love their communities, put their heart and their mind and their soul and their passion, their spirit into these communities. And there's such important businesses. And I get why banks are risk averse with this stuff. A lot of times they don't really understand the business. A lot of times it's just hard to, I mean, you got to come up with a really tight business plan, and there's a lot of things they have to check off. So that leads me to you. How do you all, okay, so maybe I can't get a loan from a bank or whatever, or SBA loan or something. So what happens if I want to start a restaurant? Here's my plan, and I come to Mainvest. Like, walk me through what happens and what I hopefully will benefit from if I go through y'all.
So, basically at the core, on the front end, what Mainvest is like a reg tech platform to enable the business to create a vehicle so that they can go out and raise capital from the community. I think the crowdfunding thing has always felt a little bit like a handcuff, because of people think about like donation-based crowdfunding and it's not about disaster relief. It is an investment. So you're basically pricing a return that you want to be offering to the community as opposed to offering to a bank. You price that term in something that makes sense for your business and you feel like adds value and is providing value back to the people in the community that are supporting you. And we enable all of that, like, in like a regulatory compliant framework with a single place for people to go. We facilitate the like operationalization of repaying the investors over the course of it. So you're not like writing 150, 200 checks every 3 months. That model wouldn't work as well, I think. And then we work with the business to get everything ready and then give them the tools and tactics to go out and raise that capital. And then over the course of that campaign, as they gain momentum, it unlocks our ability, within the regulations, to start sharing it with the base of investors that we have, that has been primarily cultivated just from other businesses going out and raising capital. On the investor side of the platform, these investors it's not like, these are like private equity sharks, like looking for like crazy deal. These are just community members that are like seeing the value of diversifying a portion of their investable income into tangible local businesses because the return makes sense primarily, but also because that money is going to something that you can see. It's not like Bitcoin. You can invest in a business that you can actually go to and experience, that you can actually affect their growth by sharing with friends and family. And, really it's all about alignment and, aligning communities and the local businesses, because as you said, like you fall in love with them. Like, you talk about all this crazy polarization happening, basically like the news and everything. When you talk, like, it's not there on a local level. It's one of the most refreshing, like sanity providing things, and looking down on the local level at these communities of just people that are all getting along and providing value. It's just a much more human experience.
Mm, mm. So you've got how many? Okay, so what do I do? Let's say I'm like, okay, I've got this idea, I've got a business plan. Like, walk me through. I hear about Mainvest. Maybe I hear about it on this podcast or wherever else. So I'm going to submit a plan and I'm going to ask for, like, do you all help people think through, what kind of offer they want to make, what kind of
Yeah,
return, like,
we absolutely help with that. What we can't help with is, like, we can't help build the business plan for you.
yeah,
I think it's definitely something where, to start on Mainvest, it's past the idea stage. You're at a point where you're going to do this. You have a business plan. You might not have this like a lease signed, but you have like locations in mind. You're thinking that out. You have a baseline understanding of how much capital you need, and an understanding of like your P&L pro forma business model, so that we can work with you based on that to like price out an investment vehicle that fits with cash flow and fits with the business model and is still compelling to investors. And that's the kind of like the, not the magic, but the vehicle that most businesses utilize that we built as spokely for this is called a revenue sharing note. And it really is, it's designed to be it's a debt instrument that rests low on the balance sheet as a single debt obligation, pretty much right above common stock equity. And it's tied to being paid back as a percentage of future revenues generated. So it's like a long-term merchant cash advance, but with the fact that it's paid back quarterly. The return profile is not like the MCA, like 40% plus, almost like predatory, violating usury laws, but able to do so because of the variability. The businesses are actually pricing the return of the security. And the importance of that is we wanted to build an instrument that was designed to allow businesses to very seamlessly and simply take on a bunch of small chunk investment into into their balance sheet, without it being crazy overly complicated, but also to have it be as close to equity as possible in that sense of alignment, where, because it's tied to revenue, the faster that the business generates and accelerates their revenue growth beyond the initial management projections, investors don't get paid back more, but they get paid back faster. So it does align that incentive. And when you have the community aligned with incentive and they're acting as not just investors, but also consumers and evangelists of your business, because of that alignment, it tends to lead to higher performing businesses across the asset class. And that's really what we saw as the core thesis, pressure tested, when we effectively launched a brick and mortar investment platform, and then 6 months later went into a pandemic. Hadn't planned that one. But what I would say is the silver lining of the pandemic was it did act as a pressure test of that thesis around, when the market is underwriting, the market these businesses are serving are voting with their wallets, saying they want this business there. They're better equipped to invest in a business that they actually want in their area than a bank is to underwrite that without that kind of input, that kind of like social underwriting input. And what that came out on the other side was, through the course of the pandemic, with an asset class, 80, I think at that point it was like 85% food, bev, and hospitality, our business default rate was around 4x lower than SBA collateralized lending during the same period of time. And the business closure rate was 1/10 the brick and mortar average. So these businesses were able to survive through the pandemic. I mean, I have so many like just through the pandemic optimism stories in seeing these small businesses get incredibly agile, figure shit out, find different lines of business. Yoga studios starting to sell like Zoom yoga classes when they never had done that before. Breweries doing like being able to do like taproom delivery. Doing like online beer tasting, like all these really cool things that, coming out of the pandemic, as brick and mortar foot traffic came back, it also, like, those lines of business didn't necessarily go away. Like, they were still able to do it. So they, like, through that agility, they built new lines of businesses for their small business. It was just incredibly awesome to see. And that tangented a little bit because we got into the pandemic, but like in conversation. But yeah, the like on the front end, the way the Mainvest giving works is a vehicle for capital, but on the back end, it is capital that's tied to people in the community. So that capital has an ancillary and continued benefit. It acts as a customer loyalty program unlike any other.
Yeah, it sure does. So are most of the investors in these places, they are local community members?
I think it's around like 70% or so is like within like on average like 10-mile geographic 10-15-mile geographic radius of the business. For like hyper suburban businesses, it's a wider gap, like population density weight kind of thing. But yeah, and that's like, you know, beyond the reg tech, we also like work with them around this strategy and like how to go out and, you know, how to position this and how to make sure that like you're doing it in a compliant way and you're not like saying, hey, I promise that this is going to be the best investment ever. No, it's like, this is the opportunity, this is the risk, we really believe in this. If you believe in this, we're going to be paying you this over this period of time for your support, and we'd love to have you on board and as part of the community.
Yeah. And how do they find, like, how do they find the investors? They do it through their social media and their channels, or through you, or both?
Both. But it definitely starts with the business having a plan, and we work with them on that plan to go out to the community. And so when you think about like almost the cycle of it, it's yeah, like there's, you know, friends, family, colleagues. Hey guys, like anyone should share this with your friends. You know, if you're an existing business raising for expansion, obviously you have a built-in customer base, and you can utilize that and be like, hey, loving customers, you know what we've done. Now we're going to do it again. We'd love your support. um, you know, businesses do things, you know, like even like as grassroots as like handing out like flyers, or like inviting people to like tasting or luncheon and kind of explaining the opportunity to them. But it just creates a vehicle to be able to do that in a really efficient way. And when you think about it, you know, compared to like donation-based crowdfunding, you know, donation-based crowdfunding doesn't make a lot of sense for a for-profit business. You know, like, hey, like give me money so I can make money. It really has to be around like, let's share in this opportunity. I want you as a partner in doing this. And, you know, that partnership is around, you support us, we're going to grow the business. We're going to tell you how we're doing. We're going to tell you whenever we have like a new menu item, you'll be the first to know, kind of thing. It's kind of creating an inner circle. And to be clear, on the investor side, like these investors don't have, it's not strictly, they don't have like control of the company or anything. They can't make business decisions. It's not like that's where like equity also sometimes doesn't make sense, especially when you're going with a crowdfunding model, because like if you're giving up a percentage of ownership of your company, like you probably want to have people that you know really closely doing this. Whereas with this debt model, it's, you know, you're providing a clear linear return back to them, and just sharing in the success of the business and the growth and in the risk.
How many investors would, like, I mean, is there an average number of investors you typically see in a deal, or is it widely ranged? I mean, I imagine, like, and what's the typical deal size?
Typical deal size is like 100 to 150K. And so, you know, that's like restaurants raising for you know, big portion of build out. You know, sometimes it's part of the capital stack, sometimes it's the entire capital stack is done through the Mainvest campaign. You know, it's very intently designed to play well with other forms of capital. So it's not like you do Mainvest or an SBA loan. You know, in fact, a lot of businesses by raising through Mainvest are able to unlock SBA debt, get better terms on it because of, you know, for one, the delevering of the institution's position, but for two, it gives the one thing that the banks don't have in their underwriting model, which is actual market validation. And you, like, you know, that bank model is really kind of turned into like, hey, you know, I want to launch a ketchup flavored popsicle stand in Stowe, Vermont. They're like, great, like how many beds, how many baths, how far along are you in your mortgage payment? It's much less, I think, focused on the larger level. I think there are some community banks doing great work, and I don't want to like rope them into like the larger institutional model there. But on the larger level, it's, you know, like almost like a robo underwriting. Like these are like the check boxes. It has nothing to do with the actual like viability of the business or matching that with whether it's a fit for the community and the community actually wants it there.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So how many investors would typically, like, is the,
All
what's
right,
the,
so you asked that. I think it does range. Like average investment amount on the platform is like 1,000, but it's definitely a barbell curve where like if you look at the composition of campaign, there's gonna be some people investing like 5, 10K, like people like, you know, closer in the business's community. And then there's going to be a lot of, as you go more broadly, people are like, oh, that's great. I could put $100 into supporting this local business in my community and get a little bit of return, diversify that way. That's fantastic. So yeah, I'd say it averages for like every 100K, so maybe like 75, 80 investors across a campaign.
Okay. And then they have the businesses had to offer higher returns over the last 6 to 12 months as rates have gone up, and there's
Businesses are pricing anywhere between like 8 and 18% effective like annual IRR, like in the restaurant space. 8 on that low end is like, if you're an existing business with a proven track record and you're like launching like 2 other locations, and you have like a community of people that like you like really fostered, that's where in terms of the pricing, it is really, we work with the business to figure out what actually makes sense. Because when you think about it, it's like, what is the market cost of this capital? Prior, that market was limited to institutions and how institutions like, but when you open it up broadly to like the retail community of or just the community, like citizens, the citizen weight of return is different, because citizens also don't have those same crazy high yield financial return opportunities that institutions do. So being able to risk adjusted get a 10-12% annualized return, if diversifying 5% of your investable income into a local business in your community, uh, there's not a lot of other ways to do that in a very tangible way, where you can actually see the thing that you're investing in, walk by it on the street, see the coming soon sign go down and the doors open, and sit in that seat on that first day and taste the product. It is something incredibly special. And so in balancing what I call like that Bank of America to Bernie Sanders spectrum around, like, this is an investment from a financial standpoint, it's an investment from a community standpoint, and there are a lot of different things in terms of how you can value that, that consumers can evaluate.
Man. How do you make money?
So I'm pretty proud of our revenue model. It sometimes feels like a nonprofit revenue model because we don't have any upfront fees. When we bring a business onto the platform and launch them, it is a partnership, and we don't take revenue unless the campaign is successful. So we have a one-time fee upon the business closing the campaign that's percentage based on the total amount raised. So it averages around 6%, but it's hybrid. It's 4.5%, which is basically our cost covering for all investment that comes from the community and comes from the business community. And then 9% for all incremental investment that comes from Mainvest investors, like our investor base. We do run like paid targeted advertising for them that, like, we don't have additional costs for that. That comes out of that 9%. It's kind of baked in, and averages out to around 6%. I think it was 5.8% Q2 of 2023. I haven't checked Q3 yet.
If you're like, let's say I'm dialed into what Mainvest is doing and I love what you're doing. Maybe I don't have local restaurants that are part of it, but I want to invest. Like, can you invest in, do you have like a fund or some way that an investor can say, I'm going to give you this amount and I'll let you deploy it effectively, looking for this return?
Not yet, but it's on the horizon. It's on the roadmap. And the way I would describe it is, like, for us, when we look at all the different things that unlock, what we can build and do in the future, there are different supply milestones around businesses in the asset class and businesses like in the portfolio that unlock the ability to do that. For a fund, we want to be able to have a larger pool of businesses to diversify risk, to be able to have like funds that aren't just abroad, all like invest across all the businesses on Mainvest, but like have like brewery funds or like Massachusetts based funds, that are more targeted, so that like there still is a level of community alignment there, and it's not purely financial. And I think what's important to us in terms of the model is, if you go with a straight fund model and you're just like, hey, let's invest in this and we'll pick all the businesses, you lose the community underwriting and you lose that secondary long-term value of having a bunch of people voting with their wallets saying they want your business there. That, I do believe, that's what's leading to the asset class performing so well, and really being the exact opposite of the stereotype of like 90% of restaurants fail in their first year of operation. Like, God knows I haven't seen that from the amazing entrepreneurs I've worked with on the platform. It is far, far lower. And any risk of bringing in institutional capital on top of that, there's obviously a reward for being able to deploy more capital into the ecosystem at a faster rate. but it's a delicate balance because you can never lose that core trade-off of what makes it so powerful in the first place.
Love that, man. That's I love that. How many businesses have y'all funded?
We're like around 500 right now. You know, majority in the last 2 years. I think we had like 300 in the last 2 years. The yeah, and the majority, I think around like 410 of them are restaurants and breweries and bakeries, like food and bev. Um, I don't actually know the break. I have like the food bev hospitality check mark. I actually haven't done the breakdown of like what's breweries versus what's restaurants. The nuance of like a restaurant versus like a bar that serves food. There obviously there's a big spectrum there. So I just like to lob it into the third place model of people go here, bakeries, cafes, breweries, uh, restaurants, bars, nightlife.
Or is it regionally centered around like the Northeast or like?
I think it's around like 40% is New England because we did start in Salem, Massachusetts, which is like 20 minutes north of Boston, um, which I believe is like the small business capital of of north of Boston. Uh, Very intently went to Salem because of how amazingly we believe they did in terms of like policy and structuring to like create a really vibrant ecosystem of local businesses and owner operators. Like if you walk down Main Street Salem, like you're not going to find again like not there's no like Olive Garden, there's no like Darden Group masquerading as some like hip place. Then you look and it's like just crazy like New York private equity backs putting up luxury condos, pricing out the locals kind of thing. And that is key to the mission. It's around like driving economic development without displacement. And the way to do that is by like creating better vehicles for economic alignment with the communities and the local businesses in them, and trying to provide an institutional level of scale to that. With even though they're not institutions, they are local institutions, I guess.
Yeah. Is so one of your challenges must be just awareness, creating awareness about Mainvest in other parts. I mean, there's tens of thousands of people that want to start restaurants in 2024 that need access to capital.
Awareness is absolutely our biggest challenge, and we don't do any paid advertising. We did a little bit during the pandemic. We experimented with it. I mean, the pandemic was obviously, I talk about that silver lining, but it was incredibly challenging. We had some core decisions that we had to make during the pandemic. One being, all right, this is like people are struggling. We're not sure how this is gonna like turn out. Like, do we switch from this financial like investment model into like a relief model? And what you lose there is like, people investing in businesses that have a higher likelihood of failing in that environment. We could have brought on many more businesses onto the platform, but then the long-term profile of the return would be a lot lower. And so we still decided to like be incredibly selective and find businesses during the pandemic that were in need of capital for growth, not in need of capital to like make the next month's payroll and figure it out. And that was a really tough decision because those businesses need capital. And I think the government did come through with PPP. I mean, we can talk about how it was deployed. But I will say it was deployed quickly. And that was for a heavily bureaucratic organization. I think that was a win to have it deployed quickly, and have $815 billion of non-recourse debt pumped into the small business ecosystem. Saw some hedge funds get it. That didn't make a lot of sense to me. But money weighted, I still think the majority, like a lot of businesses were able to survive because of that. And it was essential for that and should have happened. But that was also something that like we weren't going to compete with, right? Like we didn't want to compete with free non-recourse funding and debt, effectively grant capital from the government to keep business alive. That's super important. And a business doing that and then like offering like a 20% return to investors during that period of time wouldn't necessarily make sense. Coming out of it now, yeah, the opportunity is fantastic, and just like we do feel like we're out of it. I think there were a few times it was like, are we out of it? But we're out of it into now this crazy inflationary economic environment that's incredibly challenging. When we're looking at like supply chain costs for businesses, one of the biggest challenges I've seen over the last 9 months, both within and outside of our core ecosystem, is like how do you like live like real-time adapt and operationalize pricing to align with that. So you don't end up in a situation where, your costs have gone up 40%, you haven't raised your prices, or you're afraid to raise your prices because customers are going to bid. Like it requires community alignment to actually understand that, like, hey, like we're not making more money. The cost of these services are higher. And I think when businesses are able to like quickly adapt to that, and like, because it's not just about doing it, it's also about the communication and about like the empathy and understanding and having those broadcast channels. And when businesses do that, like, they're able to like make it through, and like they don't lose customer base. But that, like, the inflationary challenges are insane to me. I think the staffing challenges, I mean, that's something that I'm sure you could speak to, that you guys have seen.
Yeah.
We saw that, like, there was one quarter where when we were like kind of pulling in data from investors, that it was the first time ever and the only time, and I think it was like Q3 2021, it actually had flipped, whereas like access to capital is now the second biggest problem. Like it's still a big problem. It's not like it got smaller. It's just that staffing gap coming out of the pandemic was brutal. And, that challenge around, being able to like staff properly, compensate an inflationary environment with all of this, it is hard to run a great small business. And when you see all these amazing ones doing it, it's like, well, good. That's why banks don't have, the bank math doesn't make sense anymore, especially when that underwriting model has been based on, usually is based on 2 years of historical financials. And even for existing businesses, when you have 2 years of historical financials as your model, and you're going into, well, what was your 2020 and 21 as those 2 years, or even 2021, 22, when there's that level of volatility, institutional underwriting breaks. And though it's going to start to normalize, it's normalizing into this incredibly high yield inflationary environment where, banks aren't going to be taking the same risks because they're looking at like their yield profiles. And it's like, this is too much work for us to do it right. So we're just not going to do it. Like, shareholder value will make money other ways. And I get that is not, like, have to slice out maybe like 5% of the industry that are like local, 10, 20 chapter community banks that I think are doing some of the best high fidelity work in finding ways to lend to small businesses. So just want to make sure for everybody, because I talked to some amazing lenders and people that are doing great work there. They knew who I'm talking about.
Oh yeah, for sure. The small community banks that they understand the community, that, I mean, they're just more closely aligned and tied to the community.
Great.
So
It's awesome.
yeah, absolutely.
God's work.
Yeah, man. Well, all right. So what's next for Mainvest, man? How can we help you? How can we help you at Schedulefly? I mean, we have, and you and I can talk offline too, but I mean, we've got, you know, close to 6,000 restaurants and 250,000 employees that are in Schedulefly all the time. And a lot of those folks have a dream, right? Like they want to start a restaurant one day, or maybe they're planning a restaurant, or maybe there's one that, you have customers that, hey, we're trying to figure out how do we open location two, and access to capital is not super easy right now. Like I want to find ways that we can connect the dots and help y'all.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about it more tactically maybe offline, but I think it really is, for us, it's an awareness thing. And, being able to have a conversation with them, understand what their goals are, we can probably we can probably find a way to help. And that's really what it comes down to. And like I said, we don't have, upfront fees. We amortize a lot of those costs. So like we evaluate with the business if it's a fit. We're not going to launch a business if we don't think that they have like a viable path to getting the capital and to running the business, because it was wasting both sides' time. So in a way, like our underwriting is really around just like the market viability of the business and the business's willingness and effectiveness in going out and engaging that community and doing that in partnership with us. So, I would say the types of businesses that I like Mainvest works for, it really is around like raising capital for growth as opposed to like working capital. We are in the future working on a working capital product, but it's different, and I think it's going to be more of like a levered product. Based on the quality and performance of these businesses, being able to take capital for existing businesses that are in need of working capital, that like have all of the right underwriting markers, and being able to get them capital at better rates than they've ever seen before. And that's my goal, and lowering that cost of capital on the institutional side for them. But that's a working capital product. The core Mainvest community product is for growth and expansion. So for a new restaurateur looking to start up, like a general manager, it's like, I'm finally going to do this. I got my idea. I'm ready to go. We do that all the time. Around 50% of the businesses on the platform are new businesses launching for raising capital for build out costs for that first location. 50% are existing businesses expanding either lines of business or, example, brewery raising $100,000 for to expand a canning facility, brewery raising for tap rooms 2 and 3, restaurant raising for locations 2 and 3, down to like restaurant raising 50K for a patio and to expand out their kitchen to enable like higher fidelity and higher volume takeout. That actually was a big use case towards the end of the pandemic. For businesses. So the use cases are so varied, but like kind of like rolls into like this is capital to grow the business, not to maintain the business.
The ones that have failed, have y'all learned things from the ones that I know it's a low failure rate, but the ones that have failed, I mean, you've got this great model and all this great support. What are some
failure? I think that for one, if we look at our highest failure rate periods, I tell you, March 2020 was a rough month for us. I think we dropped around 95% on investment. And it's like, yeah, are you getting not the right time to be asking, hey, would you put $5,000 into my brick and mortar brewery that I'm not sure when I'm going to be able to open it, if people are going to be able to go to it? We saw those drops, like failure rates went up directly correlated with like whenever there was even like news or potential news of a government shutdown like that. So that happened 2 or 3 times, I think 3 times, 3 cycles during the pandemic. And we got a lot smarter around timing and what we bring on. Luckily, like that crazy volatility is gone. And, we haven't seen any seasonal volatility with it. It's not like that. It's better to launch a campaign in February than April. It really is linear. The biggest learning from failures is like, if a business isn't going to tell people about it and go out, where our failures mostly came were businesses that, we like walk through the process, they yes man us, and then we launch them and they're like, cool, like why hasn't Mainvest raised me $150,000 of low recourse debt at these prices that I want? And it's like, no, like this is a partnership. It's a community thing. We can't even start to market to our investor base until you get some initial traction. It's part of our objective criteria. And the way to think about it is the more capital that is raised from a business network, the more incremental capital that comes in from investors that might not know that business, but they're in real time seeing over the course of that campaign, that market validation, people voting with their wallets, and that unlocks incremental capital. The average campaign, it's around 60% of the capital is coming from the business efforts, 40% comes incrementally from Mainvest. When it's a case of like 90% is coming from the business, usually that's because the business raises before we even have a chance to start our marketing. So like those would be the cases where it's higher than that. But if a business is like has a plan and we work them on a plan, if they're looking for like $120,000 of capital to raise like $60,000 of that, like we like the incremental value from the Mainvest underwriting and investors that have been brought on and are kind of cultivating our ecosystem looking for these opportunities will help really fill that
out. I'd be interested to see what happens over the next 12 to 24 months with people starting breweries, because there was a lot of breweries over the last decade. Access to capital was pretty cheap, and there was a big breweries. Like we're seeing on our end, we're starting to see more, like if I look at the places that cancel schedule fly because they're closing, breweries seem to come up fairly often in that.
Breweries are still the lowest failure rate in terms of asset classes on the platform. We have like we've seen a couple. I think it's literally 2 or 3 have shut down. But so like definitely lower that we haven't seen that same trend yet, but I am seeing it outside of it. And so like I'm not gonna like say like, hey, it's because of this social underwriting, like these guys are able to like lever through at a higher rate. Could be that. But I think in general, there's going to be consolidation in the industry. There's also going to be a lot of cycling, and that's a natural cycling of what happens. There were a bunch of people that were able to get super cheap money at these crazy rates, and we're seeing it in the tech ecosystem as well. Companies that raised like $450 million shuttering their doors. It's like, how the hell did that happen? But when you're able to get capital at those low costs, and like that part of the ability to, when you're incentivized to deploy capital very quickly at those low costs, underwriting drops down. You know, use like, again, I could use the tech example, like FTX being like the pinnacle tech example of that, of, you know, people like Sequoia investing $100-some million, you know, basically without doing any diligence because they were afraid to lose out on the deal. You know, I think that happened in a like micro spread system with the brewery ecosystem, more so than the restaurant ecosystem, because even during that period of time, it was still challenging for restaurants. It became much less challenging for breweries. I think there was you know, a few like SBA policy things in terms of the, you know, with the brewery, there was like the 541 loan model where like they came with like ownership to purchase buildings that was really incentivized. There was a bunch of different things that I kind of fed together within policy that led to this almost like growth at all costs influx of capital into the brewery ecosystem. And so rather than think that the ecosystem is oversaturated, because on any like local level, I don't see that. I think it's just operators that like maybe shouldn't have gotten the capital, like trying to make it through the pandemic, and we got the other end into this environment. Um, like now we're kind of seeing the reckoning of that. And that's not to say that every business that's shuttering their doors is because of bad operators or anything, but I think that within the brewery space, it was when you have that much capital flow into the ecosystem and underwriting drops, there's going to be businesses that maybe shouldn't have gotten the capital or be able to make it through, and that leads to the increased closure rates. I don't really think there's a saturation problem yet.
Well, I mean, I think I mean, look, your model is great for probably helping a lot of the folks, because with the social capital, and you have all these people that have a personal incentive to want to help the brewery be successful. It's one thing to say, that's my local brewery, I hope they're successful, I like going there. It's another thing to say, I've got $2,000 on the line, and yeah, I'm going to, you know, I'm going to keep going and spread the word. And I mean, when you got all these investors that are helping spread the word for you, then have a unique incentive. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, not to hone in too much on breweries. I know a lot of what we talk about.
Well, yeah, right. Any
We joke,
restaurant. Yeah.
we joke about Brewvest, and like we have that like as a joke sometimes, because it's just like, wow, like it really is. You know, I think the success rate for breweries across the history of the platform is 98% in terms of funding, and like 98% in terms of after funded, like still being operational, paying back investors, you know, in good standing with their debt and returns. But I think there's also there is something magical about breweries, going back to like them being such a core third space, and like even building off of that, the concept of a competition within the craft brewing ecosystem is just so different because it's so complementary and like a rising tide model. When you have, you know, you look at a city with like a small, you know, maybe 20, 30 person population city that is sustaining 3 or 4 breweries, it's not because they're like all cutthroat against each other. They're actually like working together and like working on like brewery tours. You see breweries engaging more so with like local restaurants and like food trucks, and actually like being a grounded ecosystem and almost like a micro ecosystem for like local small businesses. And you know, like they're like hosting events where they're bringing in, you know, like pop-up retailers and all this kind of thing. There are so many amazing things that really drives that third space mentality and that value that you know, I think makes them incredibly special. And I'm sure there are non-alcoholic versions of that as it continues to grow, but it is great to see.
Well, you probably have something coming up here at 11, and I got to jump, but let me do this. You want to write down my cell, man, and just shoot me a text and we'll connect.
Yeah,
So I'd like to help you, because I think we can help you. You
for
guys,
sure.
yeah. And
We can help you too.
It's 704
Yeah.
906 2031. And I'm happy to, like, my people that listen to this podcast, I've given it out many times. It's on our public facing website at Schedulefly. My cell is like, I'm
Yeah, I just
happy to have that number. Like, I'm not afraid of people call. Where is my phone? I have a flip phone, and I don't even have an iPhone, and I love when people call it. So but let's shoot me a text or something, and I'll get your number, and then let's connect, and let's keep talking. Dude, this is awesome. I love what you're doing. I love the model. I love the passion. I love who you serve and why you're doing it. Your why is like awesome, Nick. So that I inferred that was going to be the case just reading, but it's very clear that it's very genuine and authentic. And what's important to you is super important to us as well, and important to the people that we serve. So, dude, thank you so freaking much, man.
Thank you. Sorry if I rambled a little bit. I was really comfortable here, so I just started going off. So appreciate
Yeah.
the time, man. And yeah, I'll shout you a text. We'll connect later.
All right.
Thanks again, dude.
All right. See you, man. Later.